She is my very good friend from university. She is a competitive athlete, spoken word artist, and she's currently studying in her
going in my fourth year.
Yeah. Mashallah. So we are going to be discussing leaving, heartbreak, and returning to Allah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me. Just even the idea, like just hearing the topic, I feel like it's something that is so heavy, if that makes sense. And even just the idea of heartbreak. Like, I think that's something that everybody experiences in different degrees, right? Like, some people might think, like, when you say leaving heartbreak, it might be like your attachment to one person getting cut off. And that could be in any shape or form. Like, it doesn't have to be romantic.
Exactly.
And I think that's something that a lot of people think about when they think about heartbreak. It's like, oh, this romantic connection that might have got cut off, and then how do I now cope with this?
Exactly.
But I think it also is really heavily also platonic,
Yeah.
like friendships, and even just relationships with other people that is not Allah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And like, yeah, I think, I don't know, for me at least, just the idea of having heartbreak and going through it is one of those moments where it's really like, after, when it comes to that healing process, you're standing in a position where it's like, what do I do next?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it's crazy because I feel like when we think, as you said, it's like platonic as well, but heartbreak itself is like a very Islamic concept too. And I think
100%.
I really don't like how sometimes people think that, oh no, it's just related to like dating scenes.
Yes.
And if you're going through heartbreak, it's because you did something like a sin and you need to heal from it. Well, what about courting, which is Islamically appropriate, and it doesn't work out with someone?
Exactly.
That's still heartbreaking. You still went through pain. Or what about having a friendship and it falls out naturally, even like a natural falling out? I feel like sometimes those hurt more.
100%.
Right?
100%.
It's like unsaid.
It was like flashbacks. Because you know what? I think also with us as like young women growing up, you're bound to experience heartbreak, especially like the idea of like naturally falling out with different people. That's bound to happen because as the years progress, so does everyone's lives. And so does, like, everyone's doing something different with their lives, and that's completely okay, right? And sometimes it's like you're not going to have that same free time you once did when you were younger.
Exactly.
So you're at a position now in your life where it's like, I know I'm growing, I know they're growing too, but that doesn't necessarily mean our paths are on the same road.
Exactly.
And that, like, the idea of just how platonic heartbreak and like that, oh my God, that I feel like is so important to talk about because it's more than just, like you were saying, heartbreak in this very like Western ideal of like, your heart being broken because of some guy, and even in those, situations, like you were saying about courting Islamically, like, it's hard because attachment as human beings, I feel like, is so, like, we're always going to be attached to people, attached to things. And that's just the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us. But I think when it comes to this idea of returning back to Allah, it's like, I don't think we should blame the idea that we get attached, but rather what do we attach ourselves to?
Yes. Exactly.
Because a lot of times people are like, okay, but, blame your attachment style or blame the fact that you get, too close to people or too close to things. But it's like, no, that's not a bad thing.
Exactly.
I guess what's the bad thing, if that's what you really want to talk about, is where are you investing that energy and time?
Yeah, because even with attachment styles, there's the three different kinds that you're probably talking about.
Taking me back to my psychology class.
And we actually learned like from the anxious, avoidant, and the healthy attachers. And then there's like the mix of anxious and avoidant. I guess for viewers who don't know, like anxious attachment is basically someone who is, you would say, more clingy, and they tend to like depend more on other people. Avoidant, they depend more on themselves. They're more independent in their relationships. And then a healthy would be like a good balance.
So it's like the two extremes. And then healthy is kind of like a mix of both, but like in the right way.
Exactly. Like you have a bit of clingy, a bit of not clingy, do your own thing too. And I feel like in that, it's like the attachments, it's okay to have anxious attachment. It's okay to have avoidant attachment. But when you go through heartbreak, it actually shows. Like, it's like if you're an anxious attacher and you were investing so much in a different person, then it's going to show. You're not going to be able to cope. You're going to have a really hard time moving forward in that relationship. But that's okay, because I feel like a lot of times when we talk about attachment too and heartbreak, we think that it's a bad thing to get attached. No, it's not. Like we're actually built for that. And as long as you're putting that attachment in the right place and it's not where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, because I know you know this concept. Exactly. I'm talking about the same book.
I think so.
I already know.
Like your heart, putting your hand in your heart.
Yes. So Yasmin Mujahid, I didn't even know we both got this, but it's such an amazing book, and that's what she explains is like only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be in the center. And so all your other attachments are aside, but it's okay to go through pain. And I want us to start off with that because I feel like no one really thinks, like people don't think that it's okay. They think, oh, it's your fault. Why did you even attach yourself
in the first place? Exactly. Like kind of to build off that point. It's so interesting because when you see people like grieving over the loss of having that relationship with another person, a lot of times it's like the victim blame on the person who's like, you know, experiencing that heartbreak. But it's like heartbreak is a sign that you cared, right? So if you cared, right, like that shows that you had the emotions, you had the ability to actually love and invest time into a person. And that's a good thing, right? It's a good thing if your heart is in the right place. And I think sometimes, and I think it goes back to the idea of us as people being so limited because, you know, when you grieve the loss of a relationship with someone and you go through that heartbreak, it's like, I thought that was the right person. I thought that was the right person for me, you know, whether that be for marriage or for just, you know, a friend. Like someone that you, for example, would have thought you would see the rest of your life with, maybe even potentially have kids and, you know, raise your kids as friends too. So
or have babies at the same time. I know friends like are like, oh, let's plan this out, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's platonic too. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like one of those things that's so interesting because a lot of times it just comes down to the fact that as us, we wish we could control everything. You know, it's like, I wish that this person could stay in my life. I wish things went the right way. But it's like, what's the right way?
And that's exactly what it comes down to because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is choosing the people who are going to stay in your life or are not. And I know a lot of times in marriage, a lot of sisters, like when I speak to them, and this is something I experienced myself too, where it's like, this is it. This is the person. This is the one. And you're like, already imagine everything. You're like, this is it. But honestly speaking, like if you let go of your choice in anything in the world, it's actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's choice is the best. And
100%.
there was a writer, Mamoun Yusuf, he basically had said that the best thing you can do when you're making dua, and he said the best thing he did for his marriage was he said, Ya Allah, and this was the dua he made. And I feel like if you could think of the one marriage dua, this is literally, I have some friends who say, oh, like what's like one thing you would say in terms of marriage advice when you're seeking and or like courting, and it's like, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to choose the best for you because you do not know what is best for you. And if you think that you're in control and you know it's not going to work out and you're like, wait, what happened? Well, you took things into your hands and you weren't looking into God's guidance. But if you look to God's guidance, I think that's like the way, right? Like it's like he knows what's best for you. And it's okay to go through that heartbreak and be upset that, oh, it didn't work out with XYZ person, or I'm not friends with XYZ person. But letting go is important. So that's
exactly. No, 100%. It was taking me back to that, you know, Yasmin Mujahid's book where it's like remembering to put Allah in your heart and not your hand. Oh, right. And so this idea that whatever you put in your hand, you can easily take it away.
Wow.
Right. But whatever's in your heart, like that stays. Right. That encompasses. And that's why there's always that whole debate of like, what's stronger, your mind or your heart, right? In terms of making decisions for you. But it's like at the end of the day, whatever is in your heart, whatever is in your mind, that's staying there. Exactly. That's permanent, right? That takes space. Yeah. Right. And I think this idea of that, you know, that you said that it's letting go, I think that's so important because after that stage of like, okay, I've accepted the fact that this person is not right for me, this relationship, friendship, you know, me leaving it, for example, like taking that maybe step to actually leave a friendship, like realizing that, okay, I've accepted the fact that this is done. What next? I think is so difficult because now it's like you maybe centered your whole life around that person, or you're accustomed to that person having.
Oh God, you're talking about heartbreak when you choose to break the heart,
or that's like crazy. Or even the idea of just like, you know, even the idea of like if you go through hardship in general, heartbreak, in general. You know, whether or not you're on the receiving end or the opposite end, when you've accepted the fact that this is done, a lot of times what's hard about letting go truly is understanding that the next stage of my life is going to be in the absence of this person. So like, how do I move forward?
Well, that's very hard because that's how we build relationships. We never build a relationship 100%. To say, I'm not going to be friends with this person tomorrow, or I'm not going to be in love with this person tomorrow. I'm not going to be with this person tomorrow. Exactly. So it's like everything that you situated your life in, there's a lot of anxiety in letting go, I think.
100%.
How would you say is the process of letting go of someone you are letting go of? Like, you decide that, you know what, this is not right for me.
Yeah, that's hard. Well, for me at least, in any situation, right? When I kind of, you know, take into consideration that this situation, this, you know, whatever's going on is not right for me, what really sets in stone that like, okay, I have to leave is this person going to benefit my akhirah? Do I see this person in Jannah? Like anytime I always like, even with friendships, like I always have this in my mind where I'm like, do I see this person in Jannah? Yeah. Right? Because if you do, that will direct how you live your life in this dunya.
Exactly.
100%. Yeah. And so for me, it's like, I think it's so hard because, again, as human beings, we set such high expectations where you're like, yeah, I can do this. I can, you know, like I can detach myself. But it's like we invest so much time into anyone we meet. You know, like as people, I feel like we're so, again, back to the whole attachment styles. We will always be attached.
Yeah.
It's how do you want to attach yourself?
And so who do you want to attach yourself to?
Who do you want to attach yourself with? Like, what type of person? And is that person providing you more harm or good?
That's so true.
Right? And I think, you know, when you think about how, like, we're living in this dunya, and I think it's so, like, we have to be realistic with ourselves. Like, it's not fair to say to someone, like, just don't attach yourself to the right people. And, like, that seems so easy. Yeah. Like, it's so much easier said than done. And I think that's why this conversation's even happening, right? Exactly. If it wasn't something that wasn't like an issue, rather. And I think it's important that you understand that who are you worshiping? Who are you actually centering your life? Is it the one who created you, or is it the creation, right? Yeah. Is it the other people that are living this dunya alongside you, or the one who has power over even your existence?
Exactly.
And I know that seems like such a big concept, right? But in reality, it's like, don't let go of your ability to love and to give. Like, I've talked to so many people where they think like, oh my God, you know what? Like, I just should stop, you know, being the type of person who cares for other people. I should stop, you know, investing time and energy in love. It's like, no, like, it's a good thing that you have the capacity to love.
That's why you were able to go through a whole relationship and it didn't work out. But that process, I think the problem is when people think that relationship is like an endpoint, where it's like something
100%.
has to come out of it. When you're not, as you said, being a giver in a relationship. If you're a giver and you're someone who's like, I'm here to give, that's how it's going to move forward. But if you're like, oh, I'm here to take, then there's going to be a point where you're not going to be able to take anymore, because
100%.
It's about a process. And I feel like even having any expectations at all that this is how I expect it to come over is like, it's really hard, because it's like you can't build relationships off of an expectation. There's certain scenarios that relationships get built off of, you know, so you're not going to be able to ever think that, okay, this is it, this is exactly how it's going to go. There's two people, it's working together
100%.
on it, and I feel like that's it's like a mix and mingle both sides. It's not just one person leading everything and saying this is exactly how the relationship will go.
You know, it's crazy too that like you saying that really reminded me of this concept that I just remember seeing like online somewhere, and I'm pretty sure you might have seen it too, but you know, talking about attaching yourself to other people and how, you know, it's easy to say just take all that energy and transfer it to Allah, which is 100% like one of the main things that you should do. But it's also remembering that every relationship that you do have with one another, what is the purpose of that relationship? Whether it be friendship, you know, romantic relationship, what are you both there for?
What's the purpose,
right? And it reminds me of that triangle. I'm not sure if you've seen it, where it's like the triangle where it's like if there's two people, it's usually used as like a romantic, like if there's a husband and a wife. And
we were just discussing this on the previous podcast that we were hosting.
And so it's such an interesting concept, because it's like, the closer, you know, the closer you both as individual people strive to get to the top, and the top is Allah, the closer you will be to each other. Because look at like how close the distance between the tip of a triangle is to, you know, the two sides. So it's so interesting because it's like if you're in it for the right reasons, things will go the right way, you know? And I think that's obviously the idea of what is the right way is very different, and it's not as like typical to what we assume is the right way. Like the right way could be going through challenges together and then overcoming them together.
And then drifting apart because you've overcome them together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not necessarily like the right way doesn't necessarily mean like I'm going through no problems. Our friendship, our relationship is perfect all the time. No. Right? Like even, and it goes back to like even the idea of like just heartbreak in general, right? Let's remove it from the romantic and the platonic lens. Just the idea of heartbreak. Like these are things that the prophets and the sahabas went through.
Exactly.
Like these are not like absent emotions. And sometimes, you know, we think about the Prophet ﷺ and like the companions as these like perfect people because they were perfect, but they also were human.
Yeah.
Just like us.
Exactly.
And they went through human emotions.
And
they overcame grief.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. And the fact that you took the triangle and you put it into friendships, I've never thought about that. That you could actually like put that triangle of Allah's in between the spouses and say, you know what, this is for every relationship you have. What's your purpose and who are you trying to go towards?
Yeah.
And taking that out of the lens of just relationships, well, even emotions, that anything you go through in this life is for the sake of Allah.
100%.
So it's, if you're with someone, it's for the sake of Allah, and if you're not with them, it's for the sake of Allah. And I feel like sometimes doesn't matter, like it's not like you sit there and you go through a list like this person is not benefiting my being off the chart, like you're off my list.
You're like the pros list, the cons list.
You're out.
Exactly. You know,
like that.
Yeah, like you made such a good point though about the like everything you were just saying is so true. Specifically, I think when you think about it, it's just when you look at different people in your life, you're not going to sit there and think about like the harm that you won't think like, okay, all of a sudden I want them out. Sometimes it's a gradual buildup of things, right? And you mentioned something so interesting about the idea of like when you're in the relationship with someone, it's for the sake of Allah.
Yeah.
But when you're also not in the relationship, that's also for the sake of Allah. And that's so interesting because usually we always think about I'm doing this for the sake of Allah. And then when it comes to avoiding something, I'm doing it for myself.
Exactly.
You know, a lot of times like it's something, and it's something that's so like, you know, it's so subconscious, I feel like sometimes, because it's almost like a defense mechanism where you're like, I'm protecting myself, that's why I'm distancing you.
Yeah.
No, it's not just you're protecting yourself, but you're also valuing your relationship with Allah, knowing that that person might do more harm than good. Exactly. So it's not like you're protecting only yourself, you're protecting your relationship with Allah.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then when you start to understand that all the love that you want from other people, right, whether it be romantic, platonic, just love in general, that if you turn that to Allah, who's Al-Wadud, right, the most loving, you will get that love and more that you want from other people, because he's the creator and the source of all love. He's not the loving, he's the most loving, meaning he's the most loving compared to your mom, your dad, your siblings, your best friend that you might have known since grade 1, right? It's like the most loving, and that love encompasses everything in your life. He's not just loving to you when, you know, you pray to him. Obviously, he loves you even more when you worship him, but he loves your existence because he allowed you to exist.
Exactly.
And I think that's so important, because sometimes people go through hardships, they go through heartbreak, they go through challenges, and they think like, you know, like, does Allah love me? And I've spoken about this on my TikTok where, you know, this idea of, does Allah love me if he tests me? But he loves you. That's why he's testing you. That's why he, you know, put you in that situation. And Allah knows best at the end of the day, right? There's hikmah in everything. And I think sometimes you don't realize that until you step out of the situation, right? You don't like, you're like, I don't understand what's going on and why I'm going through this. Like, you know, and then you leave the situation, you're like, alhamdulillah, things went the way they did.
Yeah. Yes, how do you build that self-esteem with Allah? Because mashallah, as the more you said your TikTok, I just remembered. I was like, yo, this girl, she knows, like, and of course, like, mashallah, that comes from education, but being able to say, well, you know what? I'm confident in my relationships that they're for the sake of Allah, and I'm confident that I can get everything I need from Allah. How do you build that in? Like, tell us a bit about, girl. Like, go off, tell me everything. I want to know.
I honestly, be just be vulnerable with yourself and be willing to accept that you don't know what's best for you. Like, even just attaching yourself from everyone else, like, honestly, sit down, cry it out, let it out, go through those periods of hardships. Don't suppress it. Don't suppress it. So understand that you are the way that you are because Allah created you that way. And that's enough for you to have confidence that whatever's happening is going to the right reasons. And that idea of confidence and understanding and having that tawakkul, I think, is one of those things that even for myself, I'm learning is that this is lifelong.
Yeah.
You know, like, kind of like we talked about before, you know, this idea of, you know, verily with hardship comes ease. And it's like understanding that, yes, as the hardship is going, that's ease is also there. Right? With the hardship comes ease. And we've talked about this, right? This idea that, like,
it's not after, it's with.
Exactly, it's with. And so when you're going through hardships, and for me, even when I go through hardships, I have to be realistic with myself. It's like, let yourself feel those emotions.
Yeah.
Let yourself cry. Let yourself, you know, like, let yourself be that person that needs to let it out. But remember, at the end of the day, Allah's the one being, I was going to say person, but not person, but the one being that will always be there for you and will never abandon you. You can be as attached as you need to be, and he'll never let you go, right? And he says this in the Quran in Surah 40, Ayah 60. I think, could be wrong, I'm not sure if it's Surah Ghafir, but it's Surah 40, Ayah 60. Allah says, call upon me and I'll respond to you. So it's such a simple concept, right? And sometimes when you go through hardships, you go through heartbreak, challenges in your life, you're like, honestly, I don't even know if, like, I can make dua. What is dua gonna do? What's gonna change? Everything looks so blurry. I can't even, you know, draw the lines between what I want to do next. But
I think it's realizing there isn't what am I gonna do next. It's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is gonna bless me with next, because that's what it is. He opens doors that you're not even able to see.
Al-Fattah,
Exactly.
right?
He opens that. He brings you out of that heartbreak. But I think it's thinking, if you think the heartbreak is the hardship and there's no ease in it, that's an issue.
100%.
Because the way you can grow from detaching yourself from people is so, like, that's a growth that you can't like compare that to any other growth. You can't compare that to even getting like a degree, in my opinion. The way you will learn and experience yourself, and then you feel the vulnerability and you feel the emotions and you express them.
And it's like one of those things where it's like, is it really a bad thing? And even heartbreak, like, when we're talking about it in this concept, we're talking about it as if it's a bad thing. But is it a bad thing if it draws you closer to Allah? Like, imagine you never went through that hardship and that heartbreak, and you just kept living your life the way that you did, and you were distant from Allah. Nothing would change. Exactly. And you would, you know, there's going to be people on the Day of Judgment. There's going to be two types of people. The people who regret because they wish that they did more, even though what they did was already pleasing to Allah, right? They wish they did more. It's like when you get like a 90 on your test and I'm like, I wish I got 100, you know? It's like one of those moments. But like, there's also the second group where it's like they have a regret because they just wish they did something to please Allah. To grow that relationship with Allah. And this is the Day of Judgment. This is when you're getting your book of deeds. This is when your fate is sealed. Exactly. Right? So it's like one of those things where you have to realize that, you know, a bad thing is not a bad thing if it takes you closer to Allah. Yeah. It's not. Right? Because take it in, there's so much hikmah that comes realizing that you're just a Muslim, even in general. And then on top of that, you know, being a Muslim, being a human, we're destined to sin, right? Like, if we're destined to sin, we're destined to do things that might cause heartbreak to other people, that might, on the, again, flip side, where we receive that heartbreak. And you realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made me the way that I am and made that other person the way that they are. You start to not express as negative emotions, for example, to that other person. But yeah, it's such an interesting concept because, you know, when you realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also opens doors for everything. He opened the door for that friendship to exist. He opened that door for you to even meet that person. You know, like, it's so crazy when you even think about, like, I've done, like, sometimes I sit and I really just think about how is it that even you and I just meeting in general, the way that even the smallest thing could have happened where, like, that could not have even like, our friendship could not even existed, right? Like, for example, like, you might have went to a different university. I could have went to another university. But the fact that we picked the same university, right? We bonded over the same thing, we ended up being a part of the same club. Like, it's these like little things that we don't think about that formulate the big picture.
Exactly.
And Allah does that out of his love, especially if those relationships, those friendships are deeply rooted in, pleasure of Allah. It's like, how do you stray away from that? And it's also like crazy because, when you think about like just the idea of love, right? And because you're married, you can also think you can relate more to this. Me not being married, I can't relate to the relationship part.
Yeah.
But like when you look at love and the concept of love in general, you always think that like there's two people benefiting, right? If it's obviously a relationship that's like healthy, exactly. But then when you see that the source of that love is exhibiting love even more, like when you realize that the relationship that you have, that you're loving someone that's a friend, it's a partner, and you realize that exists because Allah loved you enough to bless you with that, your love for Allah grows even more.
Exactly, because
right?
It's that whole concept of you being able to connect with Allah through the things you love as well. I don't think He takes anything away from you except to give more.
100%.
And I feel like in any like life experience, like if you ever lose someone, right? That's a part of heartbreak. Like it's a heartbreak you didn't even know was coming. It's like death. That is the biggest heartbreak for a lot of people. I was literally just reading a few days ago that you can physically feel like a heart attack similarity to when you go through heartbreak. You can physically feel it.
I heard that as well.
That is so crazy because that means that literally it is true. It is real. If you want to make something real, it's like, okay, we have so many issues with people thinking mental health issues are real. Imagine you can physically feel it in your heart. So I feel like that pain of having like a loss in your life. And I know, so we experience this a lot, maybe our grandparents, maybe anyone in our life. And it's like that heartbreak is really, truly, I'm going to meet this person in Jannah and I'm going to leave it to Allah and He's going to be able to reconnect these connections in Jannah, 100%. Inshallah. Here we have nothing. Here it's like, I can't do anything for any of these relationships. I just need to do my best and I need to do it for the sake of Allah, whether that's a relationship, a spousal, or like a friendship, anything it is.
Exactly. And it's so crazy you brought about like just the concept of death and going back to the confidence of how do you build that trust in Allah and that love for Allah. You have no choice to.
Exactly.
Especially with death, like when it comes to that idea of now they're not here anymore, it's like you're face to face with what choice do I have? And the only choice you realize that would actually take you on the road to healing is knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly does know best. Right? And when you look at the Quran specifically, like every single ayah serves a purpose. Right? Whether the ayah had to do with, specifically pertaining to a situation at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and the ayah being like there to guide how to approach that situation. Even like in Surah Al-Anfal, right? Surah 8 ayah 30, Allah says what? وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. But they plan and Allah plans and Allah is the best of planners. So if you sometimes the only option we have is to trust Allah, and that's the only option we need. That's the best option. If there was 100 other options, that's the only option we should choose. And sometimes it takes going through hardships. It takes experiencing loss, things that we wish we could avoid to the T. And I was having this conversation with my friend literally on FaceTime a couple of days ago, and I was telling her how and it took us a moment, like we really paused the conversation. And we're like, wow. But what do you think about death and the heartbreak that comes losing someone you loved and you valued in this life and transcending and then, transcending to the next? And we talk about Jannah. Like I've spoken to my friends and I'm like, I can't wait until we reunite in Jannah. What is between us in this dunya and Jannah? Death. Right? We can't just go to Jannah.
You can't reunite before you actually separate.
You have to separate. Exactly. And so I was telling her like, we have to lose each other to meet each other again.
Exactly.
We have to
actually that's every person is going to be lost on the day of judgment. We're not going to even want to even see anyone. Like we're gonna go through that separation
where the only choice and option you have again is what?
Allah.
To be reliant on Allah.
Exactly.
The only thing that you can do is face Allah. And if you prep yourself in this dunya now, by Allah's will, it'll be easier for you to attach yourself to Him on the day you need it the most.
And
you know?
honestly, I don't think like detaching ourselves from people means that we're supposed to be like
100%.
mean and like you can't even like rely on anyone or they can't rely on you. It's not about that. I think what it's about is that the essence of your being, every single decision you make is for the sake of Allah, meaning that, you know, there's like a hierarchy, and my spouse and I speak about this as well, where it's the hierarchy of God, and then
I love that.
what it's like God first, and then my spouse, and then what, you know, everyone else. And it's just like that hierarchy. Once you keep that in your mind, you're like, okay, anything I'm doing, as long as it's pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then I can go down and I can actually, you know, there's a concept of obeying your spouse, and then I can follow that. But everything else comes in that order. And I think that with any relationship, if you're following that, then it's healthier. You know, you're
100%.
able to actually put God first. And even in like a relationship with like a coworker, for example, you know, you're setting the right boundaries with your coworker. You know exactly what you can and can't do. And if you're continuing that, then you can see that relationship grow. And it's from your side. And I don't think it has to be both people who are like, this is like something we're both in on. Because I know it's hard to sometimes feel that in the communication. Right. But it's like really like you don't have to openly say it sometimes. But I think it can just be generally for yourself as a rule that I'm going to have this as a purpose. My relationship is going to serve as I'm going to be putting God first in this relationship, which 100%. Also means maybe not both two people not actually fulfilling each other like to the 100% core because they're putting God first. But I also think that's okay. And that's part of accepting that this 100%. Is how it's going to be in this life. We're putting God first.
Yeah. You know? And you mentioned something so important, this idea of, you know, when you talked about the, you know, the hierarchy and putting Allah number one, it's so interesting because if you do that, you see that everything below God, Allah puts barakah in. Sometimes people think so like, if I don't give my all, I'm going to lose something. If you don't give your all to the limited people in your life, and by limited, I mean people that will all die one day, and you put it to the one that's everlasting, has existed before us, will exist after us, right? Then you'll realize that because he's the controller, right? He's the provider, Razak, right? He's the one who gives. You'll realize that if I put my trust in him, if I put everything that I have in him, right? At least as a center in the core, everything else in my life, even if it doesn't look like it's falling into place now, will fall into place. And it reminds me of this, like, and it's so crazy because I've heard this like quote. The first time I've heard it was like beginning of the year, and ever since then I've just kept hearing it repeatedly at different places. And I think it's by like Steve Jobs or someone. It's like one of those like random quotes, but it was like, when you go through things in life, you'll see life as being a bunch of dots, right? And it's only after a situation happens, the only essential way to see the dots making sense is you leaving the situation, because once you're able to look back, you'll see how the dots connect.
Exactly.
The only way for you to see how the dots connect is by looking back. Yeah. What does looking back mean? Overcoming that situation. And getting that can also, getting through it. And it won't make sense until it makes sense. Until you go through it and overcome it. And you know, when you think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his provision and just his love for us, you start to understand, when you really look back and you study Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's, like, you know, his 99 names, his characteristics, it's so interesting because he needs nothing from us. Exactly. But yet he wants to give us everything. Yeah. Right? If you walk to him, he runs to us. Imagine the one who needs nothing from us, right? Wants to give to us. Wants to, you know, like, imagine that. Like
that's the most beautiful relationship.
What does the world call it now? Altruistic, right? Where it's like someone will give when they're not going to benefit or they don't need to benefit. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like wants to give to us. Yeah. And he needs not, and even if we were to give him as much as we could, he's the creator of the heavens and the earth. He's a creator of us as well. So what do we think we're losing out on by turning to him? If he promises that he'll provide for us. Yeah, yes. So, you know, I was just thinking about an ayah in the Quran. And we kind of already touched upon the Quran and what it says. But, you know, when we go through heartbreak, a lot of times what, you know, enables us to feel those emotions is that we wish we could go back to being comfortable. We wish that we can have comfort in our relationship staying the same or things not changing. Yeah. Because when you go through heartbreak, that essentially means, okay, there's going to be a change now. Yeah. Right? My life might be absent with this person that I once thought would be present for as long as I'd live.
Exactly.
Right? And when you realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala directly talks about this in the Quran, right? In Surah Ar-Rad, so Surah 13, Ayah 28, Allah says, you know, verily in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest, right? As long as your heart is centered for the remembrance of Allah, no matter what situation you'll go through, you'll always find rest. There'll always be that underlying, you know what? Allah knows best.
That is so
right?
beautiful.
And it's like sending me shivers because, you know, and I just came back from Umrah recently, and subhanAllah, like that ayah was something my friends and I kept talking about after our trip. And I was reflecting, and I was going on this one app that it's called Haramain, but basically you can kind of go back and listen to the previous recordings of the imams at the Haram that they recited. And I was going back to one of the recitations by one of the sheikhs, and I realized that Sheikh Sudais actually read that ayah while I was praying at the Haram. And I didn't even realize it until after. And I was like, subhanAllah.
The ayah that you were connected to, that's God's response to you.
Yeah. Wow. And I was like, you know, you'll go through challenges. But as long as Allah is there, you know He's there, you turn to Him, you'll always find rest.
Exactly.
And if you're grateful, even in the times of hardships, He'll increase you with good. That will compensate for what you have lost.
Exactly.
Right? He says in the Quran, I believe in Surah like 11 or Surah 14, He says in the Quran that if you are grateful, I will surely increase you.
Surah Ibrahim.
Yes. Surah Ibrahim.
Yeah.
And then again, He talks about in another surah, right? This idea of that whatever, I'm paraphrasing the ayah, but in the Quran, He talks about how whatever you lose, He will surely replace for you something that's better.
Exactly.
He directly says that. And it's one of those like clear-cut ayahs. And I think the fact that Allah is telling us and dispersing these, you know, these gems throughout from the beginning to the middle to the end of the Quran shows that He knows we're anxious. He knows we're people that worry. He knows we go through heartbreak. But that He's reminding us that He's there, He's there, He's there. How many ayahs did I just talk about in the span of like, you know, these couple minutes, like 2, 3?
Yeah.
Right?
And they're all ways to leave heartbreak and return to Allah using the Quran and using your connection to Allah.
He could have said it once and that's it.
Exactly.
But He says it multiple times. And these are just the ones that I said now, right? There's multiple ayahs where Allah talks about this.
Exactly.
And so as long as you remember that, like, it's okay to go through these challenges and experience heartbreak. But if you turn to Allah, you'll understand that He'll provide more for you than what you've lost.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
That is beautiful. Jazakallah khair, Yasmin, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I really appreciated it.
Thank you.
Inshallah, on that note, we are going to end off, and we really hope that you come back.
Inshallah. No, I definitely enjoyed
Yes.
this, and I'd love to come back. Honestly, again, this was such a beneficial topic. Thank you so much for having me, first of all.
No problem.
And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in all that you guys do, and
Ameen,
you know, in our conversation for sure.
Ameen.
And make whatever we go through, that we've gone through, whatever we go through in the future, easy for us to bear, inshallah.
Ameen, inshallah. Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone.
Wa alaikum salam.